Hey, this is Rick Morgan with Immaculate Comics, and I have Ed with Compleat Comics here. Welcome, Ed.
Howdy.
Good. So let's. I have a few questions I want to ask you first before we just start going wild and crazy. But the first one
No.
is let's get the elephant out of the room. What is Compleat Comics, and why is it spelled the way it is?
Well, that's easy. It's spelt the way it is because that's the way it used to be spelt.
Yeah.
It's the old spelling. And I'm big into etymologies and learning where words come from. And when I saw that the word complete came from complete, I grabbed it. So, and as for what does it mean? It just means that I can help you with pretty much anything. Like I'm a collector, I'm a seller, I'm a presser, I'm a stain remover, I'm still learning. So it's a reflection of just probably myself and what I try to do with books.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a very succinct answer. I'm reading a book about pirates now, and
Pirates.
yeah,
What are you
I like
reading?
to. I've actually I climbed the Dewey Decimal System up and down, and try to get through every section instead of just the 520s, like where I like to hang out. I like to explore. And so
What's in the 520s?
the science, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you do that, and I would be typically in the philosophy department.
There you go. Yeah, like the 480s or something. Yeah. And so I like to climb up
You
and
know
down.
that.
Exactly. Well, everybody go in the Library of Congress now. I'm trying to save Dewey a little bit. And so I looked up the word pirate. I thought it came from privateer. It's a complete coincidence that pirate and privateer, that they sound the same. It's an old Latin and Greek name, and buccaneer doesn't come from like the word mouth like I thought it did. It came from a French word. I believe it meant something like as akin to a goat or something. I don't know why. Like goats take things. They just take whatever they want. Right?
The French.
Yeah, exactly. And so what was
I am
it?
French,
My son asked me once. He said, "Why, Dad, is milk called pasteurized? What does that mean?" I said, "Well, it comes from Louis Pasteur, who was a French, scientist, and he was heating up this milk and then cooling it quickly before it curdled, but enough to kill the bacteria." Is 19th century. So, and he said, "So you're saying it's a complete coincidence that cows live in a pasture and it's called pasteurized, right?"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Well, I don't know. I that seems bizarre, but maybe it's true." And so I looked it up, and it's not a coincidence. Louis Pasteur was a pasture keeper, like what they called a herder of cows at the time, and sheep.
Yeah.
And so his name was his job, and so it is not a coincidence.
Well, it used to be like that, right? A lot of the names that we have today, like Miller and
Cooper.
Yeah, they were all related. So they all came from somewhere. And that's important because, words have origins, techniques have origins, and it's not as if we suddenly get the word or the technique or the concept in philosophy and we just throw everything out before it. Like that provides context. And context is something that we lose a lot, not only just in this community, but in pretty much every community. They're just throwing context out the window and forgetting where things come from, like it's irrelevant or they come from bad places. And that's a whole other conversation, but that's fascinating. And it does make total sense that they would be related.
Yeah, I always there's an old saying my grandpa used to say. I'm not sure where he got it, but he used to tell me, "You may not know your history. You may forget your history, but your history will not forget about you."
Mm-hmm.
He used to say.
Yeah, that's why they always say you're doomed to repeat it if you don't learn it. So
yeah, exactly. And I have another question for you, if you don't mind. And this one you may have answered, but I know you have answered before. Can you share a fun? I like to start off kind of lighthearted. A fun story from like your childhood or your younger days with you visiting an LCS or getting a specific comic book find or something. Like maybe it's a recent thing. Maybe you found a great book recently.
What's an LCS?
Local comic shop.
I know. Just, I mean, we already covered a couple things in the last time we talked. We covered that I used to work at New England Comics in Brockton,
and I found a picture
of comic books. Yeah, because I was too young legally to work there. So don't tell anybody. And that, I don't know if I mentioned that when I lived in Tucson, there was a comic book shop about 20 to 30 minutes away on bike, and I didn't have a license at the time. And I would ride through 100 to 115 degree weather to go to this store that had basically almost a full run of Amazing Spider-Man from 100 to 250 or 60 at the time. And I would do these trips back and forth and back and forth with my backpack full and just go there and buy them up.
Wow.
So I got pulled over once by a police officer because I was going too fast.
Really?
Yeah, I was on a 15 speed. I must have been pulling anywhere between 40 and 60. Who the hell knows? But I got pulled over. He's like, "You're going too fast." So I don't know what you want me to do. It's a big hill. I'm on my way down. I'm not going to use my brake. It's fun.
Yeah, that is a fun story. I used to ride from Junction City, Oregon to Eugene, Oregon, which was about 25, 26 miles on my bike, to save the 75-cent bus fare because comic books were 75 cents.
They were.
Yeah. And so I used to get 2 pieces of cardboard. In fact, I bought the Watchmen comics this way. I remember buying them. They came out. And I'd go to get my box. It was Wednesdays. I think I went every other Wednesday. And I would ride my bike out after school out in, along these like windy, farming roads, and it'd be raining, and I'm riding my 10-speed bike out there. And and at the time I didn't have a bike lock. I just had to find a place, to look around to find a place to hide it. It was by a university, which is a very bike steel worthy zone. So I was always paranoid. So, and then here I would be 26 miles away with no way to get home and no money. Right. So I would stash my bike in the unique, ivy bushes or behind dumpsters or something. And then I would run up as fast as I could, because this building was really old and it smelled old. It was probably 110 years old at the time. It was really old. And the stairs were creaking. I would just book it up the stairs. But the other half of this floor the comic book store was on was actually an old bookstore so it's just the flood of the smell of the books it would just hit you, right? The mustiness of it. And then just my heart would start pounding fast, and I'd be getting all my quarters and stuff, and find my comic books. And then I could hardly wait to read them, but I didn't. I put them in the cardboard, which I had tape, prodigiously placed. I could make a little folding flap out of it and jam it in my jacket, and then ride my bike home, completely negative calorie for the day, right? For spending the day out there.
Well, you'd also be bulletproof.
Yeah. If I engender the wrong kind of crowd.
Just in case somebody wanted to steal the books.
Exactly. Well, the Watchmen books were probably worth a little bit recently.
Yeah. That's worth a little bit.
Yeah, they were weird. They were weird at the time. I have another last question for you before I would start to let Roman the conversations here.
One more question.
How do you think comics will be? And so I've been doing this for 40 years. Let's say another 5, 10, 20, pick your length of time. What will be the next change in comic books? What will we see? How will they morph as the people we are too old and crotchety to get to a comic book store? Are they going to be digital? Will they be still physical? Will people still be collecting them? What is your forecast for the future?
Just based on the fact that we had a huge Kickstarter early this year for ISOM #1, that tells me that print is going to stick around.
Yeah, that's strong evidence. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That was this year. It's not going anywhere. Now, as for the quality of the books and the quality of the paper and the publishers, we're starting to see an influx of a lot more indie publishers, very similar to the end of the 80s. I'm seeing AWA, Scout. There are just some smaller publishers that are coming through. Bad Idea popped up for a little while, and I think they went under, and now they're trying to come back again. And there are a lot more than just those 3. If you just look on my comic shop real quick and just see
there's Red 5, I think, is another one.
Yeah, Red 5. And if you just look there, you can see that there are a bunch of small publishers popping up. So paper's not going anywhere. I know there's a strong push into digital, obviously, because it's cheaper for the manufacturers to send that out to everybody, and they can just gift them and their codes and all kinds of ways to distribute. But at some point, this is my hopefulness, is that there needs to be a backlash to some degree against some of the technological elements that are getting in the way of our lives. And I remember when I was a kid, we would go to a comic book store and, we'd talk to the owner, we'd see other collectors there. They wouldn't be trying to like get in your face and convince you that putting a book in a CGC slab was a coffin and how you should never do that. They were interested, what's a really cool book that came out this week, or look at this artwork. And there's something about the tactile nature of holding that, but also the interactions that you have, especially when you go to a comic book show. And that's just not going to be all old books all the time. And that's not going to survive if it's like that. So we definitely have at least 10 to 20 years more of paper, assuming it remains in a supply, that they have enough in the supply chain to make paper. I know there was a shortage for Marvel. We saw the paper degrade considerably during the lockdowns and the pandemic. So there are a lot of factors going on. As for whether or not how long it sticks around, I think it will be something for collectors all the time. I mean, people still collect baseball cards, the Babe Ruth cards, Hank Aaron cards. There are a lot of old cards out there, a lot of collectors. So whether it's a store of value or for collectors that want to read it, there are going to be a multitude, and I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, I agree. I feel very much the same way, because I thought differently in the mid 90s when DVDs first came out, because I thought this is going to kill movies at theaters entirely, which I was completely wrong. And I also thought, well, pretty soon they started giving us comic books on CDs or DVDs. Like they could suddenly get a whole run of Spider-Man. You could get on eBay for I don't know, $10. You could get all of my stuff. So, well, there goes the motivation to buy the book. Me not being aware that some people don't want to read it at all. They just want to have it. I didn't think of it as an NFT, like a token kind of thing, which is something I didn't predict, which is true. An interesting thing too about print too, another aspect that is sort of entered my mind recently. I was at Abbey Road Studios in London a couple months ago, and there was an old guy in there, and he's doing like talks about obviously the Beatles and Elton John and David Bowie and these guys. And he said in 2005, he was in the room when they pressed their last record. Their last press was pressing records, and it was like some Beatles album. They had with the original record machines from the 60s, and he pressed the last one, and they were giving them to the employees. And I said, well, why just was one running, and why this? And he said, well, the problem wasn't that we couldn't sell them. The problem is we couldn't buy parts to keep them going. Like everything else had stopped making except these old Beatles records. And we couldn't get the material to cast the vinyl from. We couldn't get the paper that we needed. We couldn't get electronics components. We couldn't get the hydraulic. It couldn't be supported by just one press, right? The network and things. And so eventually they had to give up. They were the last gen.
That is a fear in some arenas, that the technology or the awareness of how to use it goes away, because we move on to other things and then consider it obsolete, and we don't need to learn about it anymore. And this goes back to what I brought up earlier, just talking about context. Technology is built on previous technology. So if you lose the awareness of the previous technology and you're just relying on what's current, and then the old stuff goes away, people forget how to use it. What happens when the new stuff breaks? Or how are you supposed to come up with something new if you don't know where it all came from in the first place?
Right. I used to work at Aerojet Rocket Research in Redmond, Washington. I used to build and design propellants for space vehicles. And we had these old Mars mission rockets and all these other tests that had been started in the 70s and some in the 60s. We didn't know how to build them anymore because they didn't keep great notes. They were going really fast through rockets and through developments. The first catalyst was coconut husks. And they literally kerosene was the first fuel, like one of the first propellants. So how they built these things, we don't know. We have no records. We didn't have any. We couldn't rebuild these old rockets. If they said, well, why don't you just make the old ones since they're so much cheaper and just use that technology? Well, we can't. It's actually, we have to push forward because no one knows how to make the old ones, because we only recorded like the performance, but we don't know how that guy was forming this thing and how the shaping of it went. We just don't know. It's just completely lost. We have the designs of what they look like when they're made, but not the process of making it.
Yeah, I mean, and think about that in other content. I know this is going to veer off comics for a second, but Aristotle came up with the rules of logic back in 400 or 500 BC or BCE, depending on how you count it. And if we erased all that knowledge away just instantly. Let's say that there was an EMP that went off and destroyed all the servers and the books were burned and everything. How long would it take to come up with that again?
Yeah.
It's just an intriguing thought. I think about things about the importance of knowledge and where it comes from quite frequently.
Yeah, that sounds good. I there's a movie in the 70s. That'll be my last foray away from it, from England, about something like The Stand, but it was the British version of The Stand, right?
Mhm.
So everything happened in England first, of course, and it was a similar thing where they only had a few people left, and they had to rebuild their society. And the first thing they did was had to grab books and seeds.
Mhm.
Like let's get our knowledge together and let's save some seeds and go off somewhere else, and then let's start that. We need those two things to start. Probably should have got some weapons, but it was England, so
Yeah, and that actually will segue us too, because that's just goes to the importance of knowing the basics of something, right? Like when we're doing comic books, we need to know the basics of dry cleaning and the basics of water and the basics of how paper is going to respond. And we hopefully gradually accumulate our knowledge by looking at multiple different sources and seeing what works and what doesn't, and what we're good at implementing. And I might not be very good at doing that, but you might be great at doing that, and it's the same thing. So how much experience you have and how much awareness and knowledge you have about the topic are super helpful, but we really need to start at the basics to understand a lot of things. I see a lot of people jumping into advanced techniques with important books, and doesn't go over too well most of the time.
or their courage ramp is steep. I get that a lot. I get phone calls from people say, "Hey, look, I did a couple books. It went okay, so I grabbed my Tales of Suspense 39, put it in my press." This kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a little too
false
fast
courage.
there, buddy.
Yeah,
That's
it happens more than you think. They're super nervous at first, right? I remember I was at an airport one time with a guy who was just having kittens over here because he had a bad situation where he had his book like sticking to a metal plate, like he got it wet and then pressed it with a metal plate and didn't put something between it. And
Yeah.
it was, I don't want to say which book it was because it'll narrow down the field of who this guy was. There aren't many out there. And so he and it was stuck. It was like stuck to this board.
It does that.
And I helped him steam and get it off with, there was still some damage, but it wasn't as bad. But you could hear in his voice that he was as distraught as he'd ever been. And literally like 10 days before was his first pressing guy. He was like, "Oh man, I'm ready to rock now. This is easy."
Glad to do it.
Right. So he got a powerful dose of chagrin.
A very quick wake up call.
Yeah.
Don't screw around.
Exactly. You got to have.
I had that happen with a backer board. It was too wet. I used a heat iron. Boom. They were married.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only with applying more moisture to slowly get that sucker off there. But yeah, that was a moment.
Yeah, I've had a few. I'll call them eye openers myself.
Balls, eye openers.
Yeah, exactly. They're like confidence checks, right? Like, how can I recover from this? And it's awful. It is really awful
the first
when that
pop
happens.
staple. I was, oh my God.
Your gut just sinks. And here's the thing. I think to myself, if I'm ever working on an X-Men 1 or Amazing Fantasy 15 or something, and I'm not scared to death, then there's something wrong with me, right? I should have all the cool collected confidence and know what I can do, and I should have that, and I should need it to start. But I also need to have all of the awareness, every sense primed.
Mm-hmm.
I actually even have a list that I look at the side of what I'm going to do, what my plan is before I start, and I go down the list to make sure I don't forget something, because
I write it down as well. It just starts off with I don't bother writing the dry clean down, but I do like the count, the inspection. Am I going to do stain removal on this book? What kind am I going to do? Do I just need a spine fix? What are the problems? But yeah, I haven't had the problem of doing too much to a book just yet, or in a long time. But that's always a risk too, is that we forget the next step or make an obvious error, and you just hope it's fixable very quickly. I mean, I know sometimes I've moved my hand a little fast and it'll curl up the piece of paper a little bit, and I'll be like, "Oh, okay, we have to put that back." And you hope to God that nothing, you don't cause any permanent damage, and certainly not somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, for sure. What can you tell us about Compleat Comics? Like, I know that you do clean and press books, you submit books, you sell books.
I do.
What would you like to share about it?
Well, I mean, I'm not in it for, I mean, when I first got into cleaning and pressing, it was because CCS was taking so long with my stuff. And we were also locked down, and I wanted to learn something new. And it just so happened that this was the thing. And the more I do it, the more it's like, how can I get better?
Mm-hmm.
How can I get better at this? And each book is basically a broken little thing in some small way or big way. And what can be done to bring this back to life, restore it. And I say restore, not in the CGC grading sense, but just bringing it back to life sense, like reviving it or whatever you want to call it. And I don't have a lot of clients. I don't look for clients. I've actually always been approached by people who saw something I did and they wanted me to work on something for them. And I have a tendency to say no. I don't want to work for a lot of people. I like to work for myself. And I don't have a problem telling them this is not a good book. I already have it in my possession. They want me to press it. I'm like, I don't think we should do it. So I'm very keen on knowing if I do have a client, what they want to get out of it. And if I can't do it, and I don't think anybody can do it sometimes, like, just let them know this is pegged. This isn't going any further. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is it's an entire arena of knowledge that I don't have. And there's something about like museum restorers when they first were repairing the Sistine Chapel, for instance, and a lot of fabrics, and when those are brought back to life that have faded with time. And if there is a way to do that with collectibles or valuables, whether they're mine or somebody else's, and if there's a way to do that effectively that doesn't harm the item, but just brings out its best qualities and helps remove layers of time, then that's something that interests me. Fixing things, first off, it was, for a lot of us, it was fixing ourselves. But before that, we were trying to fix other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get your practice on others.
Yeah, a lot of people practice on others before they work on themselves. And then when you're confident in having fixed yourself as much as you need to be functional, then you start looking for other things to fix. If you're a fixer, a lot of people are fixers. Yeah,
that's good insight, I think, about that, about how to do what drives us, right? What drives me might be different than what drives you. There are some people who are completely financially motivated. A lot of people are a mix of other things. Some people want to do their own books. Some people just like learning it. Maybe it's just a hobby. A surprising number of people are just older people looking for some way to spend their time. And they kind of, for me, a great thing about this is being not really forced, but encouraged to remove some of my old books. And then before I clean them, I go through and I read them again. And I look at them and I remember when I first got it. And I remember the ads for Hubba Bubba bubblegum and other things in it. And then I'll go and
some of the ads on the back are so great.
I know, right?
Like the Captain Marvel ads, like, don't be a sissy. Like,
yeah, exactly. There was an interesting thing I found recently was, and I forget, it's an early Amazing Spider-Man, the early 200, I think it's 215, 217. It's the first appearance of Madam Web. There's got some excitement because there's a Madam Web
movie.
Yeah, something coming out, right?
Which is probably going to blow, but
I looked at an old Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers from the, I don't know, 2 years before that, 3 years before that, and Madam Web is in one of the Hostess Twinkies ads. Like she's throwing cupcakes to stop robbers from robbing a bank or something. It's this Madam Web character. I was like, whoa, she's in an ad for Hostess. And I forgot how stupid those ding dong ads were. Like every single time there's bad guys who are thwarted by tossing some ding dongs at them and they stop it. eat them or something like this. But man, the
We're
things
busy
that we
robbing a
found,
bank, but there's a ding dong.
exactly,
Have that instead. It's better than
exactly.
money.
But that was like a Madam Web test ground, apparently. That for this character in this ad, like, it's just what? Yeah, that was really fun for me. We have a comment here. So it reads, learning and gambling both fall together. I know I've posted just recently using your UV light with my CGC graded Iron Man 1. The back really improved while still slab. Yeah, that was interesting. So Brian had emailed me that he had put what we call a UV light, which is not a UV light. Just like grape nuts is no grapes and no nuts. This is just a light, right? But he put it in a slab. Now, I have tried this myself as well, but I didn't have as much luck because in my case, I think the book was probably more moist when it was sealed in the inner chamber, and gases had built up because of the heat of the light, and it was pushing out, and there was like condensation on that inner sealed area on the book I was trying to do it on. So I said, yeah, enough of that for me. I said after a couple tries, right? I'm like, because I think that, my books that I send intend to be more moist than they might be from someone who lives, in a drier climate.
Yeah, you do live in a moist climate. So
yeah, super, like, especially today. But yeah,
right, I'm the exact opposite. I have to increase the humidity in my room to work on anything.
Yeah, there you go. Mine are like heavy
20,
when I get them.
yeah.
So putting a light on it in a sealed container is a risk for me in that case. But in his case, Brian did it in the slab, and it worked. And it's interesting because it's also a comment on the quality or the UV absorption of the slabs themselves, which I know to remove only about 0.5% of the.
Yeah, it's negligible.
Yeah, it's nothing. Of any light, and especially UV, it just is not good for that at all. But he did it in there. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the grade's now better? Even though who knows, right? We know that the grade can go down in this lab because I've seen many books be on the window and have faded, and that grade is no longer valid if your Avengers #1 is pink and not red on the cover, right?
So the page quality has changed, so it could change the grade as well.
Yeah. And if you send it in and have it regraded, they crack it and open it, then maybe it's cheaper.
Yeah, there's no other way to know, and it all also depends sometimes on who's going to grade it on the other end. Or I often think are they in a good mood or a bad mood today? How many of this book have they seen today? Are they done with this book?
Yeah, there's a joke at my local comic shop. The owner, he has said a couple of times, I hope this guy doesn't get in a fight with his wife today, before he grades these books, because they're on the edge. They could go either way in his own estimation. So he's hoping that the mood of the grader is leaning towards just get him out faster kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm curious if anybody has snuck a little bribe in before.
Yeah, just put like $20 on the back of the book.
Just right in there in the centerfold.
Yeah, exactly. This was stuck in the middle.
On me.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the terrible stories about, was it PGX, the place in Oregon? They all kinds of weird stories. I don't know if they're true. I don't even remember the stories particularly, but about there being some, backdoor handling of like grading their pals' books at a different grade than other people, or people that work there submitting them, and it really hurt their reputation quite a bit. And I'm not sure they ever recovered. But how do you take the subjective and make it objective, right? How do you take prettiness of a book, the quality of a book? They've done it. They've published a book on what they do to judge it by. But I know myself, I've done it once, and I've seen other people do it more times, submitted the same book because the slab was broken or whatever, gotten a different grade. So not by a lot, maybe half a point or a point, but there's an error zone. There's a buffer area on it's 8.5 ish, a lot of times.
Yeah. And there's also the possibility of mishandling.
Yeah.
I've had books mishandled. I've had clients send in books that didn't look like how we sent them in. That's for sure. I had one come back. We had, what was that? It's official. It's really the second appearance of Rocket Raccoon, but the first in a comic, and the Hulk one. And it came back with a full book bend on the cover and on the whole book. And the last picture I had of it, no such thing. So we cracked that out, and we're going to send that back, and that bend is gone, but that wasn't there when it left here.
That's happened a few times that I've heard of. So we have another comment here. It says, using hydrogen peroxide and other chemicals should be considered restoration Changed my mind. Oh, and his name's Ugly Ewok. That is actually the one Ugly Ewok. Yeah.
I don't know. I guess my question is, Ugly Ewok, what is restoration?
That's a good question.
So if you can answer that, then we might be able to answer your question. But before you answer that, there's nothing to answer.
That's a really
Yeah,
good
this
point.
was a thing. Like I said, I'm philosophy history background. So the importance of definitions, if you don't have a definition, we can't talk.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, I've heard people talk about additive and subtractive restoration.
I've heard that.
And so that was a front of one of the Overstreet guidebooks it was like 10 or 12 years ago. They talked about additive restoration and subtractive. And that's where I first got the phrase, well, okay, if you're removing something that's subtractive and you're considered cleaning it,
Right.
additive is putting tape or touch up or something. That's pretty clear. Something like peroxide and other chemicals. Now, I'm a chemist, so for me, coming at this from the other angle, basically it's hard not to define anything as a chemical, right? So I have to
Water's
play
a
a little
chemical.
you have to play a little differently in this realm, right?
Air. You could argue air and the
yeah,
elements in
totally,
it.
yeah.
Chemical.
So now
So that's
you're
another word.
treating the paper and you're changing the aspect of something in it. I
Mhm.
think I know what it is, but you're
Which will
changing
change
some
on its own anyway.
chemically, but you're not adding something.
Here's the thing, though. In a way, you kind of are, because you have to add it to remove anything. So I'm not saying I'm not for or against calling it restoration or not, but you kind of have to add it in there to take something out. Same with an aqueous bath with just water. You have to add the water before you take the other stuff out. So is it only not restoration if the thing you add isn't there anymore?
It's only
We can
temporary
really
resident.
break this question down quite a bit. We could be here all night.
Yeah, I wonder if any of the other viewers have a comment on that, because I don't know. Because like water naturally absorbs in the page from the atmosphere, so does
Mhm.
oxygen. Is
And it's
that
partly made
restoration?
from water.
I didn't add it, but it got there anyway.
Mhm.
So is it now self-restored? Right?
Yeah, it's the other thing. I have another issue with the word organic. Like they call it organic food. And in
Mhm.
my mind, every piece of food is organic.
Yeah. Anything that's
Like
carbon-based except
show me
carbon
some
dioxide.
inorganic food, please.
Exactly.
Can you find some?
Unless
I
you
don't
eat
think
rocks
so.
and steel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough because you have to work within a framework. Like if you're writing a poem and it's an iambic pentameter,
Or a
like then
haiku.
you have this design about which you can start writing your poem, but we don't have a common language around which we say restoration, right?
Mhm.
Is the book being restored? People have said, I get you can imagine lots of positive and lots of negative comments about
Oh
things. And
yeah, I can imagine.
yeah, I get a ton. And so I get there's a lot. And so
There's way too much. Let's just put it that way.
yeah, I never play in that game. I always just delete and gone. I don't have but people will say things like, this is terrible what you're doing to these books. They should naturally they're old. They need to be dirty and old. And my common response used to be when I was responding would be, well, what about an old book that's clean, that was kept clean? Should I
Mhm.
make it dirty now? Should that now be turned to a dirty book because you said they're supposed to be dirty? Like, what
Mm.
is supposed to be? What is it supposed to look like?
See,
And
it's funny because I would take a different tack and say, well, then don't mess with your books.
yeah, don't worry about mine.
I'm gonna do what I want with mine, and you do what you want with yours.
Right,
How about that?
right. Yeah, that's another common one, is this shouldn't be done. You shouldn't remove this date stamp or this signature from this book. And I said, well, if it's a community book that the public owns, maybe we should have a vote on it. But this particular book is not yours.
Mhm.
So I don't think you get a say
Yeah.
in
How do
what
you
this
get to
person does.
should?
Exactly. What does should mean?
You
Right?
know,
Exactly. I'm
that's a problem. I was That's a problem in philosophy that they still haven't really quite figured out yet. Because they go into morality, and you're going from what is like reality and what we are and how we should act. Oh, how we should act. Well, what do you base that on? So the same thing with what you should and shouldn't do to your books. What do you base that on? Like that sounds more like an opinion, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, we all have opinions, and some of them are great, and some of them other people agree with, and some nobody agrees with. But that doesn't change the fact that it's an opinion. And if we're going to have a grading company such as CGC or CBCS or what is it, ESG or EGS?
EGX, I think.
They're relatively new, but they're going to set up their own parameters. And if we want to play by their rules, then if we get caught, then you get caught. Should you not have done that? Well, if you wanted to get that grade, probably not. If you didn't want to get a restoration grade, don't do that. Or don't go that far. So
yeah, I agree completely. Like, you have to have a parameter space developed. Now, someone else has defined what restoration means for us. So our own opinion only matters to us, right? The people we can convince. It doesn't matter to the people giving us the powers that be, giving us different colored labels, and we have to abide by their rules. Now, what is your experience with different colors of labels? What have you found in your submission processes?
I've only gotten blue labels ever.
Oh, well, that's great.
I've never gotten a green, and I've never gotten a blue, purple.
So what kind of things do you avoid doing to ensure that you only get a blue label?
Well, if I do put anything into the book, I take it out. That's number one. So if I put water in, hydrogen peroxide, if I'm doing, I'm just starting to get into aqueous baths. If I put something in, it gets rinsed out. So that would be one thing that I would continue to do. As for what else I do or don't do, I don't go too far on pushing a book. I might be able to whiten it more. I might be able to get another stain out or something. But there's a certain point where it's, okay, what's my goal now? To get that pristine white and no defects or stains at all? Why would I do that? So I find that pushing something too far, I mean, there's a certain amount of awareness you need to have to just stop. So I would say that that is a big key. When I combine techniques, like I combine things from, I'll be starting with Jerry and with you and the Cap Mike clan, who've been really great to me, and I'm so thankful to everybody, is that even inside those is always, everybody says the same thing. There's a point where you just stop. So you got to figure out when that is. And if I go too far on something, that doesn't get submitted. I have a suspicion I might have gone too far. Let's just hold on to that for a little while. Guess what? It will age again. It will age in 5 years. It will look 5 years older. I don't need to submit it right now. Let's let it get some age back. So that would be what I would do.
Yeah, this is a game. I would say it's a game of years and not minutes, right? The comic book collecting and restoring and change. It's not I would discourage anyone from thinking this is a quick way to make a quick buck in getting into cleaning and pressing comic books, because you don't know which books are going to be worth a lot of money, and it can take you a lot of time to do this work. Submitting them and getting them back can take a long time. So it's a game. I would say it's a game for patient people and observant people, and people who really have to
oriented.
You have to love it. You have to love doing it. You can't, I don't think, be overly focused on the money that you're making, or else it can take your mind in different ways. My grandpa used to always say, and he got this, and he read this in a book by Andrew Carnegie, I now know, that he said, always keep money in your mind, but always keep it out of your heart. Right. So he used to say, always think about money, because nobody can live without it. But the first time you find yourself having an emotional reaction to it, you've gone too far into liking it. You need to not do that anymore. He used to discourage us from thinking about it that way. And I think the same way here is that, for me, this is an art and a science, and it's great fun and it's joy. And I love having Immaculate Comics, which started from just me showing stuff and people saying, hey, how do you do this? How can I get it? And I was like that. And all of a sudden I turned everything up to 11 and started just making all the stuff I wanted to make for everybody. Right. And that's so much fun for me. I love designing and building things and pulling ideas from other people and collecting them into my own.
I love sending them to you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. It's great. And I love that. I remember our first conversations, like one of your.
Thanks, David, by the way.
Yeah. I think I was your first subscriber.
You probably were.
I think I was. I was like 2 minutes after your video. And so I remember when our early conversations we had, and we were like, what about this? And what about that? And what about this?
Mhm.
And we were having a lot of back and forth. And I wanted to like change the dynamic from you came to me for help. And I said, let's change the dynamic from me being the expert. I'll tell you what I know, but what I know is a very small slice of the whole
Same.
body and the world of this thing. And you started sending me papers to read. You were doing your own research and looking at
Mhm.
things in university, even though I'm in a giant library like every day of this university. You were finding paper. You sent me the first paper I had for the blue light studying.
Mhm.
You did send it to me. That was from like 1980, I think. And I went back and pulled the papers that it referenced, although not all of them were available, but some were available if you flip through the book.
Yeah, some of them
And
were behind paywalls as well.
yeah, and so I got all those for free that I want. So I got those, and I read them, and I did my similar experiments with it, and I found that indeed 50, 60 years later, this was still valid. I heard about it from you. I had not known that this was photo bleaching was a thing until you told me about it.
Right,
And
and I learned about it from Captain Mike and James and Chris over there. They basically got me on the scent of it, and they hadn't released the information on it yet, but I knew that they were working on it, and so I started to dig into different light frequencies and what effect they would have on paper. And I think it was mostly, I think that first paper was mostly on dental work, but I can't, and I think they side referenced paper as another possibility. And I was very curious about what nanometer would be best for paper. That was what I was hitting you on the head over. Was is it down here in the 300s? Is it up by 530? And I know to a lot of people watching and like, what the hell are you talking? But there is a wavelength, and it's measured in nanometers, and you can see the different results based on like using a UV light or a blue LED. And I'm curious I'm going to sort of flip this around, but what got you to, I know your lights are 430 nanometers, I believe.
right.
And the lights that Captain Mike's group recommends are between 450 and 460. So what got you to narrow down to 430?
I had a shell, it's called a shell prism. Like these are old prisms here. I love prisms. These are actually prisms from the Normandy invasion from a tank periscope in World
Mhm.
War II. And I'm a prism fan. And I took a light source in a
Mhm.
laboratory, and it's from a spectrophotometer, and I put it through a prism that gets a little band about this wide of all the frequencies, and you just have to sort of guess where you can see the colors, and you have to guess
Mhm.
where the ultraviolet part is in a little ruler. And I had an old Dennis the Menace book, and I would cut with a laser cutter
Mhm.
different squares out of this paper and just sort of blind different frequencies of it and see where it was
Gotcha.
whitening. And it did. It whitened quite a bit, actually, across everything. But I found that I needed the peroxide was more necessary for me at the longer wavelengths, which were the lower energy ones.
Mhm.
I needed some other way to help oxidate. I needed less of it as the frequencies got shorter. But as the frequencies got too short, the paper also became, I didn't measure it, but it became it was obviously
Brittle.
brittle.
Right.
And I kept cutting strips out of this Dennis the Menace the book, and it was bending and it was stiffer. So I thought, okay, I'm going to need to optimize not making the paper stiff and not
Mhm.
using peroxide, which is from an experiences I had with an old the Silver Surfer with the Thor on the cover, and some other books that I'd had that a colleague of mine had showed me. He put peroxide in the back with a Q-tip on some. He just like rolled it on some of the
Mhm.
spots without the light on the back of the book. And over the years, I had these books. In fact, I sent them to John
Mhm.
for free. Had crumbled. It was like 8 or 10 years later. They had crumbled in the bottom of the bag, like exactly where he had rolled
Ah.
that stuff. That material. Those books were brittle in any way in the first place, and I don't know how they were stored. I don't know anything else except for that he rolled some peroxide on it. I don't even know that he didn't even know the concentration because he diluted it from the
Okay.
bottle of the Salon Care 40. It was like 5% probably. And it crumbled in exactly those spots on the bottom.
Mhm.
So since then, and it took 8, 10 years for that to happen, I've been paranoid of adding too much. I don't know if it's justified. It may not be justified. I don't even know how many applications there were put, but it was two different books this happened to. where it was completely destroyed exactly where the peroxide was.
Right.
Don't know if maybe he didn't rinse it out. Maybe it was sitting in the sun. I have no idea, but I've become paranoid of it. So I'm trying to avoid using too much of it. And I'm also trying to avoid too short of wavelengths. So that's how I ended up on I did not even know the 465 or whatever he has wavelength.
450 to 460.
Yeah, something like that. Well, I didn't even know that that was a thing when I found the frequency that I settled on that way.
I'm curious. This is actually I was going to actually be one of my experiments is I'm going to put the 430 against the 450 and 460 to see how they do.
Well, so you know, in case you want me to send it to you, I just ordered my supplier who manufactures mine. I just ordered from China them to make me 6 sets of the same lights at different frequencies.
Oh, neat.
They're making them for me now. They're saying it takes them 3 to 4 weeks to send them
Yeah,
here.
you can send that along anytime.
Yeah, the thing is, they actually get cheaper as the wavelengths get longer because they're all these lower energy. And so they get quite a bit cheaper. So I would have a lot of incentive to go a longer wavelength one if that was the case, if they work better. And it may not be that, maybe I can't tell the difference because shooting it with a prism, you don't know one end is stronger than another. This was a laser cut a square out. You know, it was a very, you know, it's not a really good experiment. It was, I didn't repeat it that many times. And that's, I was just looking for an optimum and that's how I settled on it.
Yeah. I'm very curious that it's going to be super in-depth. I mean, even the tanning one that I'm doing right now is I'm super curious and I want to replicate it. This is just a first go at this experiment of removing tanning, but we're going to push hard on that just to see what's replicable on my end that I can reliably turn to over and over and over again. And it could be also there's a difference with some of the ages of the books. Maybe Silver Age isn't great for this technique, or if Golden is better for that. So there's only trial and error to figure that out.
Yeah, and reproducing yourself, right? You have to have replicates. Like here's the thing: if you're doing any design, I don't want to get too technical. If you're doing a design, you have to have none and some, right? That's the amount. And if you do some at 2 different levels, then you can do something called assessing curvature. You can see if your model is curved or not. You force a straight line if you only have 2 points, but you can get a better sense of the model with a 3rd point. So you do a little, right? And then a lot. And then you can also assess error if you do replicates. And if you do replicates in the middle, you don't have to do the replicates at the end as much. It feeds your designed experiment model a little better. So I always try to do 3 levels of continuous variable and then replicates in the middle. And then it saves you from having to do lots and lots of experiments, lots of replicates, and you can get similar data in your model. And that's what I like to do.
Right, because a lot of the tops and bottoms are going to be outliers. And the main area is going to be in that middle.
You want to interpolate between 2 outer points, not extrapolate from 2 center points if you can. Yeah, so that's how that happened. I got that from you, and I looked it up, and then I did my own experiments. Landed on 435 as a balance between too much energy and too short, creeping into the UV range. There's like a 0.1% of that. It gets into the 405, and which is the first part of the UV, which definitely does, especially yellows and reds. It'll bleach them out, and having enough energy to photo bleach without peroxide, which I have some, but I don't add a lot of it because I'm just paranoid. It might be unfounded. I don't know. I just don't want to find out 8 or 10 years from now that my Amazing Fantasy 15 is a pile of dust, right? So
this conversation is really encouraging me to dilute my hydrogen peroxide even further. Like I use 3%, and I'm thinking about Joe does 1.5. I'm thinking about following that line.
Yeah, 1.5 is I don't know. I don't know the difference. It could be better, it could be worse. If it works, then that's great. Yeah.
Well, it's similar to one of the questions that popped up about brittle paper, and you were talking about like these papers falling apart after 10 years. Is the less invasive we are with a drying agent, like hydrogen peroxide dries things out, right? It dries the paper out.
Yeah, it removes the water. Yeah, it does.
Right. So yeah, that's a curious thing, is how are these things going to be with 6% or 3% or 1.5% in 5 years or 10, like in 10 years is the case that you mentioned. So I'm going to go with let's be as gentle, like use the gentlest tool and then escalate as necessary. That's pretty much my philosophy on all this.
Yeah, I do too, because these are important to me. I know I say it a lot all the time, and I maybe have a little too much affection for these books, but when I pull a book out of my boxes over here and I open up and I smell it and I read it, it's a lot of nostalgia for me. It's a lot of enjoyment for me. And it smells like the past. To me, it smells
sense
like
memories attached to it.
Smells like my childhood. It's time travel, really, for me.
Yeah, it's like people that come across their first love's smell in somebody else, just walking out in the park or something, and suddenly they feel happy. Or
it washes over you, and it brings
what the problem was.
The tactile feeling of pulling this thing up, and then seeing the ads reminds me of sitting in front of the TV, eating Fruit Loops, watching cartoons, flipping the comic book around. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so let's look at some of these comments here. We got a few stacking up here. Ugly Ewok, bought one of your Plexi cold press plates, works well. Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to be the first one to say it's just a flat, clear piece of plastic that absorbs heat.
It's acrylic, right?
It's acrylic. It's all it is. It's really all it is.
Acrylic. It works perfect.
Dictionary could work. They work well, but they're fun. I like them, and they're also nice to just pull up a little bit and see.
What are you doing with them?
What's that exactly?
What are you doing with them that they're fun?
I'm having a great time. Yeah. Well, I like it. It's fun for me because I like to put it on there on the cold press on there, and I like to lift it up with my finger and see if it wrinkles again. If the wavies are coming back, I can drop it back real quick, and that's nice. That's nice for me. It's a fun little perk, right? That I can do that. Yeah, they work well, but literally an encyclopedia would do the same thing. But for me, it's a lot more fun and enjoyable.
I would recommend, if the encyclopedia is textured, to put the shiny side of a magazine back.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. You should. I had an old Bible and an old encyclopedia when I was a kid that I used to use as a youngster. And many of my older books I look at now actually have, because the Britannica had a space in the middle of it that was smooth. It's hard to describe it. It was red, but there was like a blue flat area in the middle. And so you can see that bar like still in some of my older books from the 80s, like pressed across the middle of it.
Which
I wasn't aware. Now I look at it, I'm like, what's this? I go, oh my God, it's the encyclopedia. Man, it's like,
there was a question that popped up earlier. I think we should pop back to. It was Teflon Ron. He asked, is there anything one could do to bring back paper that is brittle? Oh, there it is. You already read my mind.
I did. I was thinking about this, and I'm going to say there's a yes and there's a no, right? So if I wash a book and it had a lot of lignin in it, and the lignin comes out, and the lignin what was making the paper brittle, meaning they have a thing called a DP. I forget what it's, a degree of polymerization, right?
Okay, that's much different than what I was thinking, but okay.
That's the term. I used to work in a paper mill. I had an internship a couple of years, and I learned all these burst strength levers and these different tools to test and work on paper while I was collecting comics. So it was great for me. And the degree of polymerization is an indication that you can get from molecular spectroscopy that tells you how brittle, that would indicate how brittle a page would be before you do the burst strength, which is the way you would check for it. So the degree of polymerization is something that can be increased is strength. Okay, but it can also mean brittleness, right? So if you have enough of these the DP gets high enough in the lignin, which is this cheaper kind of wood pulp material in the paper, then it can make the whole thing brittle and it can crack. And if you can rinse that away in I just use water or surfactant, then if that was contributing to the brittleness of the paper, then yeah, you can regain some suppleness to the paper. If it isn't, and the cellulose is also brittle, then you're out of luck. There's nothing, in my experience, that you can do. And it's very difficult to distinguish one from the other.
Yeah, the only thing I've seen was having moisture reintroduced gently, which I think could work in some circumstances. I don't know how less brittle it would be as a result, but I guess that would depend. And I've seen some people, I think I saw Jerry use methyl cellulose and just sort of paint it on there to strengthen portions. But that's not really bringing the paper back so much as it is protecting it or maybe strengthening it.
Yeah, it's a bulletproof vest for the jacket, or
basically
it's an Iron Man exoskeleton for the paper, right?
Sometimes it needs it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to keep us to an hour because I try to keep these at a pace.
That's
I
when the
want,
license runs out.
yeah. Well, I'm all good on time. I pay for the super dupe, but I want to let people ask some questions. But I also want us to know, how do we find your channel on YouTube? How do we find you? How do we contact you?
Yeah. So I just started my YouTube channel. It's just Compleat Comics, just as the name is spelt on there. And I'm on Instagram, same thing. And you can get my email and all my other jazz from that. Pretty simple. My YouTube channel is primarily, I didn't see anybody doing experiments. And I see a lot of people doing cleanings and crackings and using a lot of different techniques, but I don't see a battle. And I want to put these head to head to head to head and see what's going to work best on certain books. And then, once we start narrowing down some techniques and combinations of techniques, then we'll start applying it to certain books as, I prep them to either go to CGC or back to a client. But it's primarily going to be experiments. I want to see what works. I want to see what kind of paper quality we wind up with after running experiments. I want to see how much lighter they are, or yeah, like I said, I haven't seen anybody do that, and that intrigued me because I'm not repeating something somebody else is doing, and there's no point for me to do a whitening session on a book with either peroxide, blue LED. Somebody else is doing that, so I'm going to let everybody else do that. I'm going to do something nobody else is doing.
Yeah, and I love the way that you explain it in the first episode, right? Not knowing what's going to happen, so we're
No
all
idea.
And I have made a severe effort to get to not put so much material, because I have 400 and something videos out right now, right? So I'm like trying to not make as many of the same stuff over and over again, and I'm probably being very boring to a lot of people. So I love it when you are doing this, right? It's a new person, you got a new way of looking at things, a new way to contribute. This is great. I want more people to do this. This is what we need. We need replicates. We need more people to do it in their own way and get what the error bars are, and the bands of what we're doing. And we need people to help develop tools and chemicals and methods that we can all share and use, because we're all trying to do the same thing. I think we're all trying to do the same thing, is to improve the books without damaging them. Or
yeah, I'm technique agnostic, in the sense that part of me doesn't care where it came from. I'm just happy it exists and that I get to play with it. And so I'm happy to be a part of and contribute to every single group that exists. I don't care. I just want to do the best by the books, improve. And if there's a way to help other people do the same thing, then that's part of it. That's an added benefit to what I'm already doing.
Yeah, and I love that. I love, well, you're also, your voice, as we should come to expect, is way better than my voice, right? Like, it's very soothing.
I trained for a long time.
You did. Exactly.
I did a lot of work.
I don't know if you want to share that history with anybody here.
Well, I mean, I was a singer when I was younger. I did voice acting for 20 plus years in Los Angeles, and I'm thinking of starting it in Vegas again, just because it is something I enjoy. But I've worked on camera, I've been on stage, so I have a long history of performance, or even just speaking in general. So it comes naturally. I like to do it. I like to share stories. I actually like to hear more than I like to talk. So the fact that I'm even putting myself out there on YouTube and all these, I'm very private. So in some ways, I just don't want to be a part of everything, but at the same time, and I might have something to share, and hopefully it's entertaining. And I've been entertained by everybody in the community, even the people that don't get along with everybody. That's fine. That has nothing to do with me. I'm reminded of a quote from The Fountainhead, where basically the villain of the book goes to the hero of the book, and he says, tell me what you think of me and whatever words you'd like to share. No one else is here. You can tell me. And he's like, but I don't think of you.
Oh man. Ayn Rand.
He was so crushed.
I have.
I care about everybody to the degree that they help, and I want to help. And I don't want to get involved in any of the politics and the drama and people calling each other names. And like that's fine. If you guys want to do that, it's okay. But I'd rather just learn from everybody and share what I learned from everybody with
I'm
everybody.
happy to keep it a positive and respectful space. And that's how you'll always see me roll. I may say things differently if we're at a bar or something, but
Mhm.
I'm here, but online, I
Well, I'll
don't.
be a real dick. I have no
Exactly.
problem.
Right.
If
Exactly.
you cross me, it's over.
Couple beers in me. Yeah, right. And but I like to keep it a positive and respectful space. And I always do. And you'll never hear me say anything bad about other people that way, because I feel like you do is like, let's keep this a community, right? Let's do a good
As
thing.
much as I can. I'm only one person.
Yeah.
I can do it for myself, and hopefully it spills down, but it's not my
Yeah,
problem.
we got to model the behavior we want to see, right? Let's look at some questions here. By the way, everybody, please, if you're watching this, we only have 20 watchers. Let's subscribe to Ed's channel if we can, Compleat Comics, while we're here. And someone says, funny you should say that, Ed. I was always wondering how washing a comic first and giving it the ultraviolet light treatment to see the result. I've done that dozens of times.
And you have 2 examples of mine.
What's that again? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Hold on. We got some examples. We need to go through those first. Let's show some examples. We have, I got to turn us off here.
No, we need to be on camera.
That's right. Let's go to, how do I turn us off? I don't know how to do it.
You're probably going to kill the stream. Careful.
I need to turn off. There's just me. I need to go to no people. I don't know how to do it.
That's okay.
I've never really had this problem before.
They're on my Instagram page, so they can see it. But
well, we can look around us, I guess. Let me see if I can.
Hey, look at that.
Well, we're gonna have to look around us a little bit, I think. Here,
it's really not necessary.
So, there's an ASM 28, which I love this book. This is a great black cover if you can get it in black. And do you want to talk about this a little bit?
I mean, it's just like Teflon Ron says here, is that I dry cleaned the cover. I took it off the book. I washed it in the Cube, and then I put it not under ultraviolet lights, but I put it under the blue LEDs that Captain Mike recommends. And that was the result.
Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let me give you another one here. This is, I think, the back of the same.
That was the original back. And that is I think that's the Submariner.
Here's the front of the Submariner book. And I can see here.
Unfortunately, can't really see it, but
yeah,
you can see it's a lot brighter. The colors pop out on the right-hand side there. The whites are whiter. I mean, this was a beautiful, that was a good process there.
Yeah.
But I did the same thing. I washed it in the Cube, and then I hit it with the Captain Mike blue LEDs, and that's what I got. I could have pushed it further, but I don't see any point in pushing it further.
Now, one thing I should mention is that I really don't show this much because I hadn't perfected it yet, but the cover, it can shrink, if you wash it and get it wet. So how do you prevent shrinkage?
Oh, that's stay out of the cold water.
Well, I'll tell you what I do. And this is from Jerry the Jitterbug. And I usually put the pages between 2 pieces of acrylic. I just use the acrylic because it's thick and it regulates the temperature better. He has the Rime paper. I use a polyester, non-woven polyester fiber that I cut out of disposable bags from a hospital. Same stuff.
Yeah, everybody can just get that.
Yeah, it's from Africa too, so I have that. But I put that down, and then I put the cover on
it at the corner store.
And then I just put a weight on it, so that I let it dry. It's important that there's a porous media below and above the paper,
and you have it sandwiched in between the acrylic.
Heavy things. You can also do it in your.
Jerry uses glass that he found. I was looking to buy some, and I'm like, "Where'd you get it?" He's like, "I found it." Damn it.
Yeah, it was like a pottery store up the street from his house or something. Like he found this, and glass is greater. It's better, actually. I think it would be better if it's, so long as it's very plainer and polished, because it's very hard to get glass without little tiny defects, right? So you have to be very cautious.
Oh my!
That you're not seeing that, and it's heavier than the acrylic. The acrylic, I can get the acrylic micro polished, and I have it polished, ship it with the cover sheet on it, so that you can really keep it. And I set it down on microfiber cloth, so that I'm not getting imperfections. The 1/2 inch thick stuff is almost 2 pounds. That's heavy enough to keep it from doing, but it's expensive. So sometimes you just put a rock on it or a weight. And that's how I keep it from shrinking, is just to dry it under a pressure with porous media above and below it. And it takes about, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours maybe to try to
I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, obviously you don't want to shrink all the pages of the book.
Right. Go back and do all
Don't do that. Don't do that, everybody. Don't be, I'm going to shrink the cover and I'm going to shrink all the wraps inside too. Don't do
exactly.
that.
Yeah, it can go back a little bit if you're not careful. Especially, I noticed the Silver Age marble is especially susceptible to pulling in a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't notice it on these books, but what I did when I put them back together is I copied Jerry. He had a dowel that he hung the book from, and I stretched that in a box. I basically cut it the right size, and I hung the book over the dowel, and I introduced humidity along the spine and on the inner wraps as I was doing it, so that would form a rounded spinal area, so that when I went to press it, it didn't crush it flat. It already had a bit of a little give to it, so the cover would stay on. But I had screwed up a couple books before these two, and it didn't work out so well on those, and that's why I moved into using the dowel.
That's great. I mentioned it. I only mentioned it because I can't tell on this left book. It might be there, might not be. I can see a page poking out on the right book.
Yeah, it's very minimal, if at all.
It's like a millimeter or something.
I can't imagine anybody.
I figured out how to do it now. It's
so
I was
minimal.
a dummy, and I added it to the wrong spot, and so I was.
It's okay, you're forgiven.
I'm learning still as I move along. Hey, check out my new Spider-Man thing I got. My wife got me this for Christmas behind me there. I'm pretty proud of it. I want to make sure that the Spider-Man. Here, I'll show you. Here, this up on the wall there. It's Spider-Man climbing up. Yeah, the neon
light.
Spidey.
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
She loves you, man.
She does. She knows what makes my bell ring. But this Spider-Man poster here is the Spidey poster with the 2 twin towers in his eye in the background there. So that one I got in 2001. I won it. A friend of mine actually won it on a radio program before 9/11 happened, but after the first trailer for Spider-Man came out, when he was between.
I remember when it came out. I remember.
Yeah, and he gave me this poster at that time. They were many of them were subsequently destroyed, and so that's a prized possession as well. So I got that. But well, enough about my Spider-Man stuff in my room. I'm sorry to divert. I'm ecstatic that I was able to figure out this part. So
there we go.
This is really good, right? This is worth sharing and worth seeing. And good on you. You use the Mackie Cube, I think you said, in Captain Mike's light from his book.
Yep.
It looks fantastic. This is a game changer. People would be forgiven for not thinking that's the same book.
Yeah. Very easy. That's why I put the colored Legos, which were recommended in the book as well. So
yeah, it looks great. And the colored Legos are a good idea. And this book looks fantastic as well.
And we still have some staining down the bottom, and I could have attacked that a little further, but it's just showing its age. That's fine.
Any tips on cover removal and replacement for the audience?
I mean, I don't think I can add anything other than what you and the community has already done. I use the Teflon covered staple removers that you have, and I use the capable staple. I use all that. I find that very helpful to keeping the staple from shifting around too much. But the only thing that I can add is that I've been starting to try and slip underneath the staple, if I can, try and slip in some SRP to minimize any pushing into the centerfold paper, because I see some real careless removals, and I know my first couple were we could have done better. But anything to protect that paper down there, especially underneath the staple, because how many centerfold detached do we need? And I really want to pull out the Tengojo paper or Rime to try and repair it, because that is still on my to-do list.
I've seen that many times too. What I try to do in the middle is I like to use that tool with a little line on it, and I hold one side of the staple down,
push it down.
I lift on the other side because I don't want to create this motion in the middle while I'm doing it. Because too many times that little bit of bending has made a split in between the two original staple holes.
Yeah.
So keeping that force down while you peel the other one up to me is of utmost importance. I anneal my staples most of the time. Most people won't do this, but I heat them in an oven for about 90 minutes at 550 degrees, and then let them come down naturally to temperature so that they're not work hardened or brittled after that. And so that does it helps me, give me confidence that they're not going to be brittle if I anneal the metal. The oven does not have an oven that does that, but you can do it with a blowtorch too, just to heat them.
I'm gonna go get one of those.
Use the MAP gas. Don't use the regular propane. The MAP gas at like Home Depot, little hand torch, and just put them in on a brick.
So can I do a creme brulee with that after?
You actually, it's actually.
I like things that do more than one thing. They're very. I like to have those. The other thing would be to if the staple is really tight in on the centerfold, I like to use dental tools. What you would typically remove scratch away plaque with, and sneak it underneath if there's enough space.
I have this stylus is what I use.
Right.
But I use it because it's round like the inside of the staple holes.
But something thinner than the staple remover if necessary, and to sneak that underneath and lift it up just enough to be able to get the tool in there.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. I like the meaty old golden age staples because they're beefy and they're thick, and you can get a hold of them with some pliers, right? And you can like get into there. So, all right. So I'm over time now. Any last thoughts? Anything you'd like to share?
We're over time. Oh my God!
Exactly. What could happen?
You're getting kicked out of the bar, everybody.
Well, I try to do it because people will see it's over an hour and they don't watch it typically. So
wow. Man, I watch a 2-hour morning show every day. So I don't know what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
But no, just I would say steal from everybody. Steal from everybody. Learn from everybody. Find out what works for you. If you remember to give credit, give it. If you don't, I don't think it's the end of the world. But just be mindful of where your shit comes from. That's that. And steal with love is pretty much, when I was in acting school, that was one of the mantras that was instilled in us, is when you see something good, steal it. And just remember that you learned it from somebody, because most everything we learn from somebody, and a lot of times we forget where we learned it from.
Yeah. I agree. I love it. Thank you so much. And any other channels you'd like to give a shout out to that we haven't mentioned so far?
Well, yours, but we're already here. Mine, and just because I'm running the experiment right now, I'm the Jerry the Jitterbug and Captain Mike, and you know what? I picked up something from, I haven't mentioned it yet, and it hasn't popped up in a video yet, but I learned something from Paul Kosnick, and he had this technique for using a syringe with the needle, and I think it was with undo, and it was basically to get it in a really tight spot and to be able to control the flow of the undo coming out. So it was one drop in very small amounts, because those bottles are a hazard to try and apply directly. So it was very smart, and I used that. And so Paul, thanks for that. And so thank you to everybody I've learned something from. And I will be referencing you all on my channel and giving you props, because I owe a lot of what I've learned to everybody. So
great. Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and your hypnotic voice is entrancing us all. Maybe we can talk to you again some other time.
Stay awake.
All right. Take care.
Happy New Year, everybody that's here and everybody that watches this. I hope you have a fantastic night and the rest of the year. So
same here to everybody. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.